Okay, good morning. I guess everybody is here. So, can't compete with Buddy Holly here, but I guess we're going to compete with Buddy Holly for the time being. My name is Evan Weiner. Yesterday was D-Day, and yesterday was also my 42nd wedding anniversary. So you're going to probably say, well, what has one got to do with the other? But actually it does, because I have some stories from 1944 of people I knew, stories that you probably haven't heard of either. And so we're going to talk a little bit about D-Day. We're also going to talk about what happened during the calendar year 1944. And the cast of characters includes Adolf Hitler, and also Joseph Stalin, and Nazi warplanes. Those are in the museum outside of Dulles Airport in Virginia. Interesting array of aircraft there, including kamikaze airplanes that are there. Failures, because they were supposed to blow themselves up. Hitler, there was an assassination attempt. The propaganda, and you may remember some of these cartoons from your childhood, and never really gave it a thought that they were propaganda cartoons, but they were, including this one called Bugs Bunny Nips the Nips. And this is out of circulation, this particular cartoon, because people feel in the cartoon industry that it would have been offensive or is offensive today to Japanese, although putting it in the context of things, America was at war with Japan back then. The GI Bill, how many of you, any of you veterans here, of the men? You're a veteran, so you know all about the GI Bill, right? How many of those who grew up in suburbia, your father was in the Army at some point? Anybody? Because if you grew up in suburbia and if your father was in the Army, chances are that he got a loan, a low interest loan from the government that allowed him to move out of the city, if that was the case. Presidential election with Thomas Dewey and Franklin Roosevelt. But we start in Stalingrad, and this is the turning point of World War II. Germany's march through Europe, starting on September 1st, 1939, started to recede in 1943. That's when Germany invaded Poland, although they took a piece of Czechoslovakia in 1938 and also Austria in 1938. Soviet forces launched a counteroffensive against the Germans, arrayed at Stalingrad mid-November 1942, and they quickly encircled the entire German army, and basically there were 220,000 soldiers that were there that were trapped. In February 1943, after months of fierce fighting and heavy casualties, the Germans, they're only down to 91,000. They have lost now about 130,000 soldiers. After the victory at Stalingrad, the Soviet army remained on the offensive, liberating most of Ukraine and virtually all of Russia and eastern Belarusia during 1943. The battle for the city of Stalingrad provided a decisive psychological victory. It's the turning point. Germany is no longer winning these battles. And Germany decides they're retreating. They're going back to Germany. They're going westward, and that sets the stage for 1944. Anybody see the movie last year, Oppenheimer?
Yes.
You saw Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
So you know what is this I'm going to talk about right now, the Manhattan Project. And there is the real Oppenheimer as opposed to the guy who played Oppenheimer. It's January 19th, 1942, and the United States President Franklin Roosevelt formally authorizes the atomic bomb project. In June 1942, the U.S. Army established the Manhattan Project to handle its part in the atomic bomb project and began the process of transferring responsibility from the Office of Scientific Research and Development to the military. In September, the Lieutenant General Leslie Richard Groves Jr. was appointed the head of what would become known as the Manhattan Project, and Groves selected J. Robert Robert Oppenheimer to head the project's Secret Weapons Laboratory. In 1943, there was some question and some concern from American scientists. Where are the Germans, and are they moving ahead with an atomic project? I don't know how many of you ever heard of the Major League Baseball catcher turned spy Moe Berg? You've heard of Moe Berg. Well, for those of you who didn't, Moe Berg was a spy. He was just another nondescript baseball player who somehow ended up on the Babe Ruth tour of Japan in 1933 and took all kind of pictures from hotel rooftops of these cities that the Babe Ruth tour went through. Remember, no satellites in those days. So Moe Berg is working probably for the OSS at this point, and he is snuck into Germany to find out what is going on in terms of the German atomic bomb project, and he concludes not much. However, that doesn't deter the Americans. In a letter dated May 25th, 1943, Oppenheimer is looking for some major thing to do. And he's responding to a proposal from the physicist Enrique Fermi, who is talking about, hey, why don't we poison the food supply in Germany of the military? Yeah, that's what we could do. Why don't we do that? And this is Fermi. Well, Oppenheimer asked Fermi, can you produce enough strontium without letting people in on the secret? Oppenheimer concluded, I think we should not attempt a plan unless we can poison or get enough poison to kill 500,000 men. Well, they never did get enough poison to do that. And that's Groves, and that's Oppenheimer. In July, Oppenheimer abandoned the gun design in favor of an implosion-type weapon using chemical explosive lenses. A subcritical sphere of fissure material could be squeezed into a smaller, denser form. The metal needed to travel only a very short distance. So there'd be less critical, or the critical mass would be assembled in much less time. In August, Oppenheimer implemented a sweeping reorganization of the Los Alamos laboratory in New Mexico to focus on implosion. He concentrated the development efforts on the gun-type device again, a simpler design that only had to work with uranium-235 in a single group, and this would become the basis of the bomb that was used in Hiroshima. It was called Little Boy, and he had this all done by February 1945. Me and my wife, we're in what is now called St. Petersburg, but back then it was called Leningrad, one of the churches in St. Petersburg. Siege of Leningrad, which was also called the 900-day siege, that begins September 8th, 1941, and ends on January 27th. And it really only lasted 872 days. In January, a successive Soviet offense drove the Germans out of the city and back toward Germany. The Soviets are making huge strides against the Nazis. The next big thing is Operation Overlord, D-Day. Now, D-Day could have taken place on June 3rd, could have taken place on June 4th, could have taken place on June 5th, or June 7th. Happened to take place on June 6th because the weather cooperated. I knew a guy who you might have heard of, Yogi Berra. Did you ever hear of Yogi?
Yeah.
Yogi Berra. I used to speak at his museum while he was alive 3 times a year, so I got to know Yogi a little bit. And he would always, after I gave a talk, he'd pat me on the rear end and say, good job, kid, let's go eat. But he's telling me a story one day, and how many of you had husbands or fathers who were in World War II?
Yeah, but here in the United States.
In the United States?
Yeah.
He never went overseas?
No, but
He went. Yeah, and did he talk about it much? No. These guys never talked about it. Never, ever talked about it. They went over, whether it was the Pacific or over in Europe, did their jobs, survived, went home, went on with the rest of their lives. Yogi Berra was telling me a story one day. How many of you heard of the pitcher Bob Feller? He was a great pitcher with the Cleveland Indians.
Bob Feller?
Bob Feller. Bob Feller. And one day, apparently, they run into each other. I'm not sure if Feller was hitting or they just ran into each other somewhere else. And Bob Feller said to Yogi Berra, "I don't like you." So what did I ever do to you? What do you mean you don't like me? He said, "You didn't serve during World War II. He said, "Damn right I served. I was on the beach in Normandy. Where were you?" And I asked Yogi about it. I said, "Were you afraid hitting the beach in Normandy?" He said, "No, I'm little and the bullets went high." Anyway, this is Cherbourg, and this is one of, this is a prototype, or it might be one of the weapons that was not used. Cherbourg was a staging area for D-Day, and they kept a lot of material that was used in the D-Day invasion in Cherbourg. Operation Overlord, codenamed D-Day, commences with the landing of 155,000 Allied troops, including Yogi Berra. I never met anybody else. Yogi's the only one I ever met who was on the beach D-Day, go figure. So they hit the beaches of Normandy in France. The efforts to free France from Nazi occupation began in June with the D-Day invasion of Normandy, when the Allied troops land on the beaches and start to make their way across Paris. And this is whatever is left over from the old days, or a museum piece. This was a submarine, and this is the bomb that was attached to the submarine. Again, that is in Cherbourg. Cherbourg comes back into this talk about something you probably never heard of, and I'll get to that in a little bit. More Allied troops land in southern France on August 15th. They make their way toward the Rhine River. The Allies make their push toward Paris. French resistance fighters begin an uprising in Paris. By August 25th, the Allies and the Free French forces enter Paris, and by the end of the month, the French government is handed over to the Free French troops. The Nazis are gone. Meanwhile, the Soviets are continuing, and they come up with something called Operation Bagration, and this is to get the Germans out of the way. On the night of June 21st, or early morning hours of June 22nd, the Soviets launch a summer offensive in Belarusia, 3 years to the day after Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. In 1941, the Germans had achieved total surprise, encircling millions of Russian troops and thrusting right up to Moscow, and in those days, Leningrad, today St. Petersburg. Operation Bagration, it was named after a Tsarist marshal who had fought Napoleon, and it hit the Wehrmacht with no warning. In 5 weeks, the Red Army advanced 450 miles, driving through Minsk to the outskirts of Warsaw. Nearly 20 German divisions were totally destroyed, another 50 severely mauled. It was an even worse disaster than Stalingrad. Hitler is on the run. The Soviets find something that is quite disturbing as they head back to Germany. Majdanek, the concentration camp, by Lubin in Poland. And that is where my grandpaternal family, the grandfather came from. My grandfather Harry, sister Bertha, and his brother Sam. And they left in the 19-teens. The rest of the family stayed there. And we never heard from the rest of the family after the 1940s. The first major camp to be liberated, Majdanek, near Lublin, Poland, in July. Surprised by the rapid Soviet advance from the east, the Germans attempted to hide the evidence of mass murder by demolishing much of the camp, but parts, including the gas chambers, were left standing. I remember when I was a kid, and my grandfather and mother went down to an agency in Lower Manhattan, hoping to find the name of somebody who somehow survived after 14 or 15 years. They never found anybody, and as a result, we're cousins who keep in touch with one another because we're the only ones who came from that branch of the family, so we do keep in touch with one another to this day. Anne Frank is arrested. Anne Frank is arrested in 1944 on August 4th. She's 15 years old. Nazi Gestapo captures Anne Frank, her family, including the father Otto, in a sealed-off area of an Amsterdam warehouse. They were tipped off, the Nazis. The Franks had gone there in 1942 and they hid. They didn't want to be deported from the Netherlands, and they didn't want to go to a Nazi concentration camp, so they lived in this warehouse. And Anne spent most of her time in the so-called secret annex, working on her diary. Now, some Germans have had it with Hitler by 1944. They're looking at Hitler and they're saying, we're getting mauled in the East, we're getting mauled on the Western Front, excuse me, we're getting mauled. We got to do something. We're going to be totally obliterated if Hitler is around. Got to get rid of him. On July 20th, Adolf Hitler survives an assassination attempt, second assassination attempt on him, by German Army officer Klaus von Stauffenberg. High-ranking German officials made their mind up. Hitler must die. He was leading Germany into a suicidal war, two fronts, the East and the West, and assassination is the only way to stop him. A coup d'etat would follow, and a new government in Berlin would save Germany from complete and utter destruction at the hands of the Allies. Well, they tried, they failed, and this is von Stauffenberg, who was killed that day. At 12:42 in the afternoon, the bomb went off. When the smoke cleared, Hitler was wounded. He was charged. He suffered temporary paralysis of an arm, but he was still alive. 4 others present died from their wounds. Von Stauffenberg was shot later that day. Once Hitler figured out what was going on, the extent of the conspiracy, he began the systematic liquidation of his enemies. More than 7,000 Germans would be arrested. 5,000 would die. Some would be killed. Others would commit suicide. Anybody here ever been to Quebec City? Quebec City. Well, this is the main road that goes from the upper part of Quebec City to the lower part, the old part of Quebec City. And here's Winston Churchill. He's on this side of the road, the bust. And on the other side of the road is Franklin Roosevelt. And Quebec City is where Roosevelt and Churchill and others begin the plans for DDay in 1944. The first Quebec conference was held in August 1943. Franklin Roosevelt, President of the United States there, Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of England, United Kingdom, William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Prime Minister of Canada, which really is a country, but not really a country, but it's part of the English Commonwealth. It wouldn't really become a country until 1982. And TV Soong, of the Soong family, the foreign minister of foreign affairs of China. In the 1950s, the Soong sisters came over begging for money and help from the United States. They didn't want to be in Taiwan. They wanted their mainland back, communist China. China took over, or communist China, Mao Zedong, took over that land in 1949. Plans for the forthcoming Allied invasions of Italy and France were being discussed. And if you go up to Quebec City today, it looks pretty much the same. The Frontenac is there. The river, St. Lawrence River, is now a seaway. That was widened for boat traffic back in the 1950s. But other than that, this looks almost the same as it did back in 1943. The second Quebec conference was held in September 1944, attended by Churchill and Roosevelt. And the decision there was made to hit Germany on 2 Western fronts. And there was also a revised timetable to invade the Philippines, resulting in the Battle of the Leyte Gulf in October and the struggle for Okinawa in the spring of 1945. This is a problem. This is called the V-2 rocket, and this is the last-ditch effort by the Germans to try to turn the tide of the war. Now, about 10, 12 years ago, I was giving a talk, and we were talking about the space program, which I'm going to talk about next month here. The space program and the Cold War, and how the Cold War and the space program, and how it was just more than just putting a man on the moon. It was about dominating space if you could with weapons. And I was talking about that, and there was this guy in this place who had been high up in the government as an officer. He served at the White House. And he told me he was in London in 1944 when the V-2 rocket was shot. The American scientist Robert Goddard's work in the 1920s largely anticipated in technical detail the German V-2 missiles that were being developed. That included gyroscopic control, steering by means of vanes in the jet stream of the rocket motor, and gimbal steering power-driven fuel pumps and other devices. And this was a weapon that the Americans and the Brits had no answer to. Launched from mobile units, each V-2 rocket was 46 feet tall, carried a ton of explosives. The first attack took place in London on September 8th and left a 32-foot crater, killed 3 people, injured 22 others. And this was the scene after things calmed down of what happened in London. It took just 5 minutes from launch to landing. The V stood for Vergeltungswaffen, or the retaliatory weapon. It was the last-ditch attempt by Germany to reverse the course of the war. Now, who made this? Who made the weapon? Well, it was the people from the concentration camp. It was slave labor. I don't know, what do you call people who were in concentration camps? Prisoners? I'm not sure what you call them, but they were in concentration camps. But the slave labor was pulled from other concentration camps for technical skills, such as welding. And they worked round the clock in an underground factory called Mittenwald near the Buchenwald concentration camp in central Germany. And they were working in appalling conditions, but they were in appalling conditions in concentration camps. There was no daylight in this factory. They got little sleep, little food, or proper sanitation. But they managed to figure out how to sabotage these weapons. Do you know how they sabotage these weapons? They figured out a way. Many were executed for attempted sabotage. Eyewitness accounts describe prisoners being hanged from cranes above the rocket assembly lines. So what was the sabotage? They urinated on the parts. And it ruined the parts. It ruined the parts. The Germans, of course, were upset and they killed them. But that's what they did. They urinated on the parts. Now, this guy right here, second from the right, is Wernher von Braun. Wernher von Braun was the architect of the United States space program that got men to the moon in 1969, 1970, and 71, 72. But here he is, and he's part of the Nazi regime. Wernher von Braun joined the Nazi Party on November 12, 1937. He claimed he was coerced by the SS. It's been documented that von Braun did not want his research used for military purposes. He even said that he was coerced into working with the party. But he came from a wealthy family and a politically corrected family. And I have a friend by the name of Dick Hull, who now lives in Florida. He's about 89 years old, who worked for NASA between 1960 and 1975. And he did talk about von Braun being a Nazi and his brother. He said von Braun was a reformed Nazi. He was just following orders. He says his brother was a real Nazi. Von Braun became the father of the American space program. But prior to that, here he is. Only guy not in a uniform. Himmel. He's there with Himmel and an award ceremony. He's the engineer who designs the V-2. And the Allies realized that the V-2 was a machine unlike anything they could ever develop. Von Braun would eventually surrender to American troops and put his lot, or his fate in his life in the American troops. It ended up pretty well for him. Anybody here ever hear of Ruth Gruber? Nobody here has ever heard of Ruth Gruber. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story about Ruth Gruber, a couple stories about Ruth Gruber. Jewish refugees finally welcomed in the United States. It's August 5th, and buses holding about 1,000 mostly Jewish refugees from Europe pulled up to the entrance of Oswego, New York's Fort Ontario, a military site established during the Revolutionary War. Why were they there? Well, they were chosen from 3,000 applicants throughout Europe who had heard of the U.S. rescue through the work of Ruth Gruber, who was a photojournalist who was also the secretary to the Interior, or assistant to the Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes. Gruber was sent to Italy as a representative of the newly established War Refugee Board to vet and escort a group of refugees to the United States. And there is Ruth Gruber. Now, I'm going to tell you this story in a minute. Let me tell you what she did in 1944. When they landed, she was called Mother Ruth. That was her name, Mother Ruth. When they landed in New York, Gruber accompanied the families to take a train, or she was on the train to Oswego. After the war, it was Gruber who once again advocated for the residents to be allowed to have U.S. citizenship, giving them the opportunity to stay in the country if they so desired. Because of her power of persuasion, Safe Haven was the only shelter in the U.S. for Jewish refugees during World War II. This is my story about Ruth Gruber. I had two friends, or I had one friend who passed away, and the other friend, Bill Goldstein. Anybody ever here watch the TV show Fame? Fame, the TV show. My friend Bill Goldstein wrote the music for the TV show Fame. He was partners with a guy by the name of Bob Block. And Bob Block and Bill Goldstein were good friends with Ruth Gruber. In 2011, I'm a member of the Greenberg Hebrew Center, Greenberg, New York, and Dobbs Ferry. And they are asking me, can you produce a speaker for the beginning of the year, September of 2011? I said, what you looking for? And they said, just somebody who could really tell a story. I said, I got the perfect woman for you. Who's that? Ruth Gruber. She's 100 years old, but she gives lectures all over the place. I could get her. Oh, okay, well, let's talk about it. We only have $500. I said, she'll take it. She'll take the $500. Only one requirement. I drive down to Riverdale, pick her up, drop her off, wait for her, watch her talk, and then drop her back off. That's it. Well, let us think about it. Well, they thought about it, and they said, we don't want Ruth Gruber. We're afraid what she might say to the kids. Has she saved 1,000 people during the war? They got a watercolorist instead. That was the last time I ever offered anybody there. But she was 100 years old. She was giving lectures at the age of 101 and 102 years old. And she knew the story. So the rest of the story is my friend Bob Block and my friend Bill Goldstein. They put together a play called Haven. And they called me up one day and they said, we have Stephanie Block, she's playing Ruth Gruber. We need a 99-seat theater somewhere in New York to show it. I don't know how to get a 99-seat theater. That's not my expertise. You'll do it. I never did. Called up people and they couldn't help me. Well, they did show the play in Reno and Las Vegas and in Southern California, and they did show it in Israel. They did get the play off the ground, and it got good reviews. But for me, I screwed up with the 99-seat theater, and I couldn't convince a synagogue that Ruth Gruber, who saved 1,000 Jewish refugees, should speak before them. They're lost. Kamikaze planes. That's a kamikaze plane right there. It's a failure. They were supposed to not be available. None were supposed to be left. They were supposed to be blown up in battle. But anyway, in the Philippines, the Leyte Gulf. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, Philippines takes place during the month of October. The main battle took place between October 23rd, October 26th. That plane is in a museum outside the Dulles Airport in Dulles, Virginia, as part of the Smithsonian Institute. Anyway, this battle is considered one of the largest naval battles in world history. The United States, Australia, and Filipino forces began the invasion of Japan. The Japanese occupied Philippines, which is part of the U.S., by landing in the Leyte Gulf. The Japanese suffered heavy losses to their navy, and it marked the first kamikaze aerial attacks. The Allies won the battle, and their victory led to the liberation of the Philippines. That was the turning point in the war against Japan, as it effectively cut off their supply route in Southeast Asia, and it was a devastating loss to their naval forces, with many of their ships destroyed and thousands were killed. The Battle of the Bulge would be Hitler's last shot at it, and that would start in December. Basically what Hitler wanted to do was go through Belgium, try to split the Americans and the British and the French forces on their way to Germany. And when the battle starts, the Germans catch the Americans and the Allies by surprise. It starts on December 16th. And the Germans demand surrender. And this guy, Anthony McAuliffe. Anybody ever hear of General Anthony McAuliffe? Yeah, you have. You're up on all this. Anyway, he's the leader of the 101st Airborne Division, and he has a 4-letter response. Let me guess what the... Nuts!
Nuts!
Nuts! That was it, nuts. And that was it. That's what he said, nuts. This impacted me. Now, you would think, I'm born in 1956, it's something that happened on Christmas Eve, 1944, would have nothing to do with my life. But it does. Because had events been different on December 25th, 1944, with the sinking of Leopoldville, I wouldn't have the wife I have today. I wouldn't have the kids I have today. I wouldn't have the grandkids I have today. Because my mother-in-law was married to one of the people who was lost at sea in the story of the Leopoldville. Anybody have heard of the Leopoldville? No? Sit back and you will hear a story. It's Christmas Eve, and the Belgium troop ship, the Leopoldville, left the pier at Southampton in England with 2,000 American soldiers, all part of the 66th Infantry Division that crossed the English Channel to France. Just 5.5 miles from its destination, Cherbourg, the Leopoldville was torpedoed and sunk by the German submarine U-486. 763 soldiers, American soldiers, killed. The bodies of 493 American sailors never recovered from the channel's frigid 48-degree temperatures. One of them was a guy by the name of George Kessler. What exactly happened? Well, it was covered up for 50 years. For 50 years, the Brits covered it up. The Americans have never acknowledged it, even though my mother-in-law did get some benefits out of it, but they never told her what happened. And the Brits told people, it was an open secret, they knew what happened, but they told their military, if you ever say a word about this, you might be in prison, and we're going to take all your benefits away. Nobody talked. It was an open secret. Everybody knew it in Britain who was there that night. And this is my mother-in-law back in the day, one in the middle, and she's 3 months pregnant when this occurred. It took nearly an hour for people in Cherbourg to realize the Leopoldville was sinking. Several hundred Allied vessels in the harbor at Cherbourg might have served as a rescue craft, but all had cold engines, while many of their crewmen were ashore celebrating the holiday. These guys were hammered. So even if they wanted to get back on their ships and get their ships going, they were absolutely hammered. The people on the Leopoldville, the crew, jumped off to be saved, leaving the sailors and the soldiers stranded. And we went to Cherbourg, that's my wife, who wanted to know about the first husband of her mother, somebody she didn't know all that much about, and she wanted to see the area, and we got to see the area. The Allied forces were enjoying their Christmas Eve dinner in Cherbourg. and they failed to mobilize a rescue effort before the Leopoldville sank by the stern at 8:40 in the evening. It started sinking about an hour and a half earlier. Belated efforts by ships, including the USS PC 1225, rescued some of the survivors. News of the sinking, 5 miles off the French coast, was censored. Decades and decades later, many families learned how their sons, husbands, and brothers died. We're not sure if my mother-in-law, who passed away in 2014, ever really got the story or ever wanted to know the story. British documents about the incident remained classified until 1996. 802 men died, including George Kessler, Blanche Kessler's husband. She was 3 months pregnant at the time. Funny thing about that, we have all of his papers. His daughter wanted no part of it. Absolutely no part of it. So we are the gatekeepers for, anyway, the correspondence. Glenn Miller disappears. Remember Glenn Miller?
Yes.
Yeah, Midnight Sonata. He was Midnight Sonata? Is that what he did? Yeah, so anyway, Glenn Miller. Band manager, Lieutenant Don Haynes, was the last to see Major Glenn Miller alive on the ground without permission from the chain of command. Miller took his manager's spot on the December 15th flight from Twinwood Farm Airfield, England, to Paris, France, to arrange for the band's appearance. The plane never reached France. It was never recovered. Miller's disappearance was not publicized until Christmas Eve, when the Associated Press announced Miller would not be conducting the scheduled BBC broadcast AEF Christmas show the following day. Glenn Miller was huge in his day. He was a rock star in his day. Big time Glenn Miller. Pennsylvania 65000, right? That was one of his songs. All right, I gotta find how many people I'm gonna offend here when I talk about this. How many are John Wayne fans here? You're a John Wayne fan.
I like John Wayne.
You like the Duke.
I like the Westerns.
You like the Westerns.
Yeah.
Did you like the Duke specifically, or did you just like the
I
Westerns?
just like the Westerns.
Oh, okay, because I got to know who I'm going to offend here, because I'm going to offend people. John Wayne, Susan Hayward, the Fighting Seabees, and that also is with Dennis O'Keefe, and William Frawley, who was on I Love Lucy. John Wayne, the fake war hero. Now, I was friendly with a guy by the name of Jerry Coleman, who played second base with the New York Yankees back in the 1950s. He was a New York Yankees announcer and then a San Diego Padres announcer. And when I used to see Jerry Coleman, I would go, Lieutenant Colonel Coleman, Evan here to say hello. And he'd say, cut that out. But we were friends. Anyway, he played Major League Baseball with the New York Yankees, served with the Boston Red Sox star Ted Williams. You familiar with Ted Williams? If you're not, he was one of the greatest baseball players who ever lived. In the Marines and the Korean police action, and Coleman thought the world of Ted Williams. Jerry once told me Ted Williams was everything John Wayne wanted to be. Coleman was not the only veteran with a very low opinion of John Wayne. John Wayne was on his way to be a big star thanks to the help from the director John Ford, but Wayne decided not to get involved in World War II, unlike General Jimmy Stewart, unlike a young Paul Newman, unlike Clark Gable, who were all heavily involved in some way or another with World War II. And that's a statue of John Ford in Portland, Maine. That's where he was from, and it's a nice little area that you walk up there. It's right in the middle of the city, John Ford. John Ford's now a commander in the U.S. Navy and never shied away from letting the Duke know about not being active in the military. He would frequently berate Wayne to get into it, saying that he was growing rich as other men died. According to author Gary Wills in the 1998 book, John Wayne's America, The Politics of Celebrity, the actor received a chorus of boos when he walked onto USO stages in Australia and the Pacific Islands. Those audiences were filled with combat veterans. John Wayne's in his mid-30s. He was not one of them. They did not like John Wayne because He wasn't there. He didn't serve. Ted Williams served. Others served. Joe Louis, the heavyweight champion of the world, he didn't serve, but he was in the military, and he was doing exhibitions to entertain the troops, and also raising money for war bonds. How many of you ever seen these little cartoons? They're 4 minutes long, Private Snafu. They're great. They're absolutely great. And some of them were written by Dr. Seuss. Some of them were written. And they had some heavy-duty talent behind these cartoons. Director Frank Capra, chairman of the U.S. Army Forces first motion picture unit, came up with the title character Private Snafu, a bumbling recruit who did everything wrong. To the GI audience, Snafu was a military slang acronym. Situation normal, all fouled up, or some version of situation normal. I'm not going to repeat it. It's a family room here. I'm not going to repeat it at all. I'll let your devious imaginations come up with the word. This is a cartoon that Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel, once published. It says, "Don't let them carve those faces on our mountains. Buy United States saving bonds and stamps, Hitler and Tojo, the liberators of America." Private Snafu, 4-minute shorts written by Dr. Seuss, voiced by Mel Blanc. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Yosemite Sam, Barney Rubble. I could talk about Mel Blanc for hours here. But he was famous for his vocalization of Bugs Bunny. Private Snafu was produced by Warner Brothers Studios, and most were directed by animation industry giants like Chuck Jones and Fritz Freleng. The cartoons were for military use only and considered classified at the time. This is one of them. Fake news. That's what it's called, fake news. You heard that before, fake news? You've never heard of fake news? People saying that's fake news? It was around in World War II. Private Snafu, and that is Snafu right there. Anyway, and he sounded a lot like Barney Rubble, if you haven't seen. Remember Barney Rubble from the Flintstones? That's what Mel Blanc used. Private Snafu's episodes had titles like Gripes, Spies, The Gold Brick, Censored, Private Snafu versus Malaria Mike, and Booby Traps. What do you think Booby Traps was about? What do you think? Put your dirty minds to work.
It doesn't go that way.
Women, boobies, and they can trap you. Booby traps. Private Snafu was extremely popular with its GI audience. Episodes addressed soldiers' gripes with a sympathetic ear, while simultaneously stressing the importance of discipline that plays in the military establishment. Daffy Duck, Booby Trap, Adolf Hitler. Yeah.
Do they show these during the movies?
Yes.
So in the movie theater, they saw it too.
Not Private Snafu. That was only for the soldiers. But you got to see this.
Okay.
The war propaganda cartoons and Daffy Duck being enticed by a temptress, but his real goal is to hit Adolf Hitler over the head. The Weekly Reporter, a Warner Brothers cartoon released on March 25th, directed by Chuck Jones, written by Michael Mortiz, music by Carl Stalling. Cartoon is a spoof of sacrifices by those on the home front during World War II. Fritz Freleng's Bugs Bunny Nips the Nips premieres, and you will never see that on TV ever again. It's been censored because it might cause some... It's politically incorrect because of the way it portrays Japanese, and even though the United States was at war with Japan at that time. That's produced by Warner Brothers Animation, a war propaganda cartoon in which Bugs Bunny fights the Imperial Japanese Army. Jack King's Donald Duck short, Commander Duck, premieres, a wartime propaganda cartoon produced by the Walt Disney Company in which Donald fights Japanese soldiers. Frank Tashlin's wartime propaganda action cartoon, Plain Daffy, is released produced by Warner Brothers Cartoons, in which Daffy Duck fights a female Nazi spy and fools Adolf Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and Hermann Göring. My granddaughter has got a couple days off in between pre-K and camp, and she watched that cartoon yesterday. And I explained, she's 5. Her birthday was on Tuesday. She's 5, and I explained what was going on in the cartoon. And she's incredibly bright, so she did get some of it. She will later. How many of you like Mel Brooks?
Yeah.
How many of you saw The Producers on Broadway? Anybody? Well, there's a scene in The Producers on Broadway where Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin are in the dance-off. The Warner Brother cartoons, they're in a stare-off, Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Yeah, sometimes I think that Mel Brooks just stole a lot of stuff, like from Warner Brothers cartoons or from the Borscht Belt comics. That's what I just think. He didn't steal. He borrowed. Merry Melodies, Russian Rhapsody. Hitler flies a bomber to attack the Soviet Union, but is met by gremlins. Gremlins from the Kremlin. About 40 wartime movies were made. The U.S. Office of War Information had a unit dedicated exclusively to Hollywood and the Bureau of Motion Pictures. There was propaganda from the other side too. Listen to some of this stuff, the Axis propaganda. After the Japanese army assumed control of the Santo Tomas camp in Manila, in the Philippines, they carefully staged propaganda photos of some of the prisoners to show how well they were treated. Prisoners, including children, were made to bow to the officers and were beaten if they failed to go low enough. Food and supplies from friends outside the camps cut off. No more meat, just rice and dried fish. Heroes. There is Hitler and Göring and Goebbels. Propaganda from the Germans. Listen to this one. German propaganda supported the efforts of the murderous Nazi regime, even attempting to portray in a positive light the horrors of concentration camps. The Fuhrer gives a city to the Jews. Sounds good, doesn't it? Fuhrer gives a city to the Jews, right? Has to be good, right? Right? It was produced in the Theresienstadt, a model ghetto established by the Nazis in the former Czechoslovakia. Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels, who once said that if you repeat a lie enough, it becomes the truth, intended the film to prove that the Jews were being well treated in concentration camps. That side of the story. Franklin Roosevelt signs the GI Bill into law in 1944. He began talking about how veterans had to be compensated during one of his fireside chats on July 28, 1943. Anybody here remember a fireside chat? You remember listening to him? That started back in 1933. He said he and his advisors had been laying plans for the return to civilian life of our gallant men and women who were WACs in the armed services. He argued that veterans would be entitled to definitive actions to help take care of their special problems. On October 27, 1943, Roosevelt turned his idea into a concrete proposal, formally asking Congress to enact legislation that would finance 1 year of education or vocational training for all those who served in World War II. You said you were on the GI Bill? What'd you take?
Excuse me?
What'd you take from the GI Bill? Did you take the college or the home? You took the college. How many years did they pay for college?
They paid I was in the World War II, Korea.
Yeah, but that would be after.
They paid for it by the time.
They paid the entire thing. Or you could get a loan, low interest loan for a house. As the GI Bill made its way through the House and Senate committees, the unemployment assistance, education, and training provisions came under fire. The Republicans worried the bill would lead to further expansion of the federal government. You're only asking these guys to literally get killed to defend the country. You should be giving something back. And Roosevelt finally does sign the GI Bill into law. On March 24th, the Senate passed the GI Bill unanimously. The House passed its version of the GI Bill on May 18th. The final version of the bill was done on June 7th, sent to Roosevelt for his approval. He signed the bill on June 22nd. The bill provided money for college education and loans for GIs wanting to own their own home or their own business. Joe Louis, The Negro Soldier. This also is a Frank Capra production. The Negro Soldier is a 1944 documentary film created by the United States Army during World War II, produced by Frank Capra, follow-up to his series Why We Fight. The film was used for propaganda purposes to convince black Americans to enlist in the Army and fight in the war. The Negro Soldier proved to be a breakout film, influencing Army members and civilians of all races. But you gotta remember, life is just not about World War II. There's a life back here in the United States and in the South. It's all about Jim Crow. And this woman, Irene Morgan, and she's suing Virginia. The case began on July 16th when Irene Morgan boarded a Greyhound bus in Gloucester, Virginia for a 5-hour bus ride to see her doctor. She had a miscarriage and she's going for a follow-up. She sat in the colored section of the bus. When a young white couple boarded the crowded bus and needed seats, the white driver, R.P. Kelly, told Morgan to surrender her seat. She refused. The Greyhound bus policy at the time said that the company and the driver reserved the right to control the seating of passengers and the right to change the seating when they pleased. It was a law unto itself. And here is Irene Morgan. The driver drove to the Middlesex County Jail in Virginia, where the sheriff's deputy came aboard. He arrested, he handed Morgan an arrest warrant. She tore it up, threw it out the bus window. When one of the officers swore at her and tried to physically remove her from the bus, she kicked him. She would eventually sue. George Stinley is 14 years old, and he's frail. March 23rd, South Carolina, 2 white girls, 11-year-old Betty June Bitker and 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames, found dead. They failed to return home the night before. Police arrested George Stinney, then 14, and his older brother Johnny for the murders. Johnny was released, but George was held and charged with the murders. His trial was an all-white jury, lasted 1 day, and he's found guilty. He had not been allowed to see his family before the trial, and he was questioned without an attorney. This was justice in the South. Later on, I knew a guy by the name of Fred who worked for United Press, who basically said justice in the South in the 1950s was the same as justice in the 1890s. The judges were all in on it. They were all corrupt when it came to black crime, and blacks were always accused. And he said the attorneys didn't do anything. Anyway, during the trial, Stinney's defense offered no cross-examination, didn't call a witness, offered no defense. The jury deliberated for 10 minutes. He's found guilty, sentenced to death, and there he is. He was executed shortly afterwards on June the 16th. He was so small compared to the adult prisoners that the prison staff had difficulty securing him to the electrodes. 83 days had passed between his arrest and his death. He was the youngest American ever to be sentenced to death and executed. Any Brooklyn Dodger fans here? One. Any New York Giants fans here? One. It's always one. Usually, the Dodger fans outnumber the Giants fans. I'm not going to ask about Yankees fans because the Yankees are still here. An unusual game was played at the Polo Grounds before 50,000 people. They had a special rule for this game. The Dodgers, Giants, and Yankees all participated. It was June 26th. It was a 6-inning game. 4 war bonds at the Polo Grounds. 50,000 people there. Final score, the Dodgers, they won. They had 5 runs. Yankees scored once, and the Giants shut out. Buy war bonds was a normal pitch. U.S. Treasury needed to come up with a lot of money fast to meet expanding financial demands. Roosevelt settled on 2 major means of raising money. increased taxes and borrowing through the massive sale of war bonds. This is another banned cartoon, by the way, because Bugs Bunny goes into blackface in this cartoon, and when he sings about Uncle Sammy, it becomes my uncle. No, when he sings about Uncle Sammy, it becomes Mammy, and he's in blackface. You don't see this on TV anymore. It was on PBS at one point. Amy Bonds Today, Irving Berlin. You know who Irving Berlin is, right? Irving Berlin wrote the songs Any Bonds Today, and it became the theme song of the Treasury Department's National Defense Savings Program. How many of you remember ration books? You do. Did you collect the ration stamps? You didn't collect it. Hey, guy who complained. He said, I collected the ration stamps. I thought I was going to keep it. I loved collecting the ration stamps. They were great. And they told him you had to give it in. I don't want to. Well, you want a candy bar? Traded in the ration stamps for a candy bar. The U.S. government created a system of rationing, limiting the amount of certain goods that a person could purchase. Supplies such as gasoline, butter, sugar, canned milk, rationed because they were needed to be diverted to the war effort. War also disrupted trade, limiting availability of some goods. The Japanese Imperial Army controlled the Dutch East Indies or Indonesia from March of 1942 to September 1945. That created a shortage of rubber. And what do you need rubber for? Tires. Although some people tried to use wooden tires, that really didn't work. Rubber is better than wood. Rationing. Well, this woman is bringing in her rationing card, and she's got pears, and she's got something else there, and she's got corn. Looks like she's got some mayonnaise there, and she's got Lipton's tea. Looks all good. Give us the ration card, you can have everything that you want. Americans received their first ration card May 1942. The first card, war ration card number 1, was known as the sugar book, one of the commodities Americans could purchase with their ration card. Other ration cards developed as the war progressed. Ration cards included stamps with drawings of airplanes, guns, tanks, aircraft, ears of wheat and fruit, and they were used to purchase ration items. My granddaughter loves this cartoon with the gremlin. It's done in 1942, and she loves the gremlin. It's a silly cartoon. Bugs Bunny says, I'm only 3.5 years old, and the gremlin says to Bugs Bunny, I like you, you're silly and all that, and she finds it hilarious. So anyway, but I had to explain what that is. How many of you knew what that was? A card. A card. Now, the whole premise of the movie is the gremlin disrupts Bugs Bunny, the plane's coming to crash, and it runs out of gas about 6 feet before it crashes. And Bugs Bunny says, well, you know how it is with these A cards. They ran out of gas because you were limited to the amount of gas that you could have each week. The Office of Price Administration rationed automobiles, tires, gasoline, fuel oil, coal, firewood, nylon, silk, shoes. Americans used their ration cards and stamps to take a meager share of household staples, including meat, dairy, coffee, dried fruits, jams, jellies, lard, shortening, and oils. Meat came off the ration list in 1944. Do you remember blackouts? Blackouts. You'd lose power because they were afraid the Japanese would come over from the Pacific Ocean to bomb, or the Germans over the Atlantic Ocean. This has to be in winter, 5 a.m. till dawn. Couldn't be in summer if you did it 5 a.m. in the east anyway, because it was light already. So this is in the winter. Officials in some American coastal cities were well aware of their vulnerabilities to air attacks and began ordering practice blackouts long before December 7, 1941, in the bombing of Pearl Harbor. March 8, 1941, Seattle became the first major American city to test its blackout procedures. Does she look familiar? Rosie the Riveter, she looks familiar. This was a poster in the Westinghouse Laboratories in Pittsburgh. It was only supposed to be there for a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden, people at Westinghouse gave it to the government. Rosie the Riveter was the star of a campaign aimed at recruiting female workers for defense industries during World War II. She became perhaps the most iconic image of the working woman. American women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers during the war. The female percentage of U.S. workforce increased from 27% to nearly 37%. Nearly 1 out of every 4 married women worked outside the homes. This is Norman Rockwell's version of Rosie, and he apologized for it.
Although
She's like an Amazon.
bad.
But he did it to show the strength of a woman. That's what he did, to show the strength of a woman. The woman was 19-year-old Mary Doyle Keefe. She was a telephone operator near where Rockwell lived in Arlington, Vermont. He apologized for making her look heavier than she was, but he was trying to show the strength of women during World War II. That's either Rosie or Naomi. Could that be Rosie the Riveter? What do you think? Naomi Parker Fraley, who was photographed in the machine shop at the Naval Air Station, Alameda, California, outside of Oakland, could be Rosie. In this 1942 photo, she is sporting a polka-dotted bandana as opposed to a Brian Hyland song. She wore a Incy Wincy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini. Anyway, but she had a polka dotted bandana. Nobody knows for sure, but the call for women to join the workforce during World War II was meant to be temporary, and women were expected to leave their jobs after the war ended and the men came home. There was a presidential election for President Thomas Dewey. Franklin Roosevelt became the first president to win a 3rd term with his victory in 1940, and he was going to seek a 4th term. And he would easily win the Democratic nomination for president. Concerned that Roosevelt's ill health would mean the vice president would likely become the president, the convention dropped Roosevelt's vice president, Henry A. Wallace, in favor of a Missouri senator by the name of Harry Truman. Thomas Dewey. By the way, what is the New York State Thruway officially called?
Dewey.
The Thomas Dewey Thruway. Thomas Dewey Thruway. That's what it's officially called. He emerged as a front runner of the Republican nomination after his victory in the Wisconsin primary. He defeated the conservative Ohio governor John W. Bicker at the 1944 Republican National Convention. I want you, FDR, to stay on and finish the job. That's the Democrats' poster. The Republicans campaigned against the New Deal. They had been campaigning against the New Deal for nearly a decade. They wanted smaller government, less regulated economy as the war seemed to be ending, but Roosevelt was very popular. To quell the rumors of his poor health, Roosevelt insisted on making a vigorous campaign swing in October in an open car going through city streets. There's a guy who told me that he saw Roosevelt in Brooklyn. He was about 7 years old. He said, I didn't know he was in bad health. All he was doing was waving to everybody in the crowd in Brooklyn. Chief issue was the war, of course. But Dewey took shots at Roosevelt's health, and he declared the administration was dominated by tired, quarrelsome old men. He challenged chiefly the management of the federal government and reiterated it's time for a change. America First Party. You know anything about the America First Party? They ran a presidential candidate, and wait till you hear his platform. On September 8th, at the America First Party's convention in Detroit, which was an apt place since Father Coughlin was still there, though he's kicked off radio, and Henry Ford was there, the party nominated Gerald L.K. Smith, the founder of the racist and anti-Semitic Christian National Crusade, as its presidential candidate, and they had one platform. A proposal for the deportation of U.S. Jews to a late designated area within the next 5 years and the sterilization of those that remained in the country after that period, which could have been my mother, which meant I might not be here to talk to you if he had his way, Smith.
I can't believe you got that far.
Well, yeah, well, there's more to it. But as it's prepared for presentation to the American First Convention, it was withdrawn at the last moment. Plank was submitted for the party platform by the former silver shirt, Homer Meritz. Silver Shirts was a fascist American organization fashioned after Hitler's brown shirts. Smith got 1,000 people or so to vote for him. Presidential election, Roosevelt wins easily by 3.6 million votes, 432 electoral votes. Dewey gets 99. It was the closest of the 4 presidential races for Roosevelt. Dewey won 12 states: Colorado, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Maine, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, Vermont, and Wisconsin. He could not win New York, but then again, Roosevelt was from New York. Captain America. How many of you went to the movies on Saturday and saw the cartoons and the serials and the newsreels and the 2 featured movies? How much did you pay?
10 cents.
10. You were overcharged.
No, 10 cents, and I went up for it.
Then went to 11. You were thoroughly overcharged. Some people told me 5 cents. Some people told me 7 cents.
My mother paid 3 cents.
She paid 3 cents. Inflation. Inflation. But you were there all day. You were there all day. That's what you did on a Saturday. February 5th, Captain America, a serial film, or a film serial, premieres starring Dick Purcell. First comic appearance of a Marvel superhero outside of a comic. It was produced during World War II, but Captain America did not get involved with World War II. There were weekly installments, 15 chapters, about 4 hours of film. Carpet. There was a shortage of qualified players to play in the National Football League. This team is called Carpet, combination of the Chicago Cardinals and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Carpet. And they were like a carpet. They didn't win a game. They just laid there. The National Football League had a team called Carpet. There weren't enough players to fill the rosters in 1943 and 44. Cleveland Rams suspended operations in 1943. Philadelphia Eagles merged operations with the Pittsburgh Steelers to form the Steagles, although the NFL just says it's Phil Pitt. I like Carpet better than Phil Pitt. I like Steagles better than Phil Pitt. Chicago Cardinals played in 1943. They did not have too many qualified players. Philadelphia had enough players in 1944. They had the Philadelphia Naval Station nearby. And the Army said, we don't need people over the age of 26. We're not drafting them. The NFL was supposed to have 11 teams in 1944, but Cleveland came back and there was the Boston Yanks, a team owned by Ted Collins and Kate Smith. Kate Smith, remember Kate Smith? She owned the football team.
Also the Yankees.
And the Yankees, yeah, when they moved to New York. Rationing, they were rationing football players. The NFL commissioner, Elmer Layden, did not want 11 teams because of scheduling problems. He asked Art Rooney and Burt Bell if they would merge the Steelers with someone else, with the returning Rams maybe, or the Brooklyn Tigers. Rooney eventually teamed up with Charles Bidwell, the Chicago Cardinals owner. The team did not win a game. Dan Rooney, who I knew, was the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers when I knew him. He was a kid back in the 1940s. And he talked about the Carpets. Then the Cardinals. That was a disaster. We had 4 coaches, none of whom was named head coach. Rationing players. So it's the old story. Who's the head coach? They were 0-10. But the reason for it was the war. It was not only was it difficult because guys were gone, but where you could find a good team was where there was a military operation in both Chicago and Philadelphia. They had a lot of Navy people because of what was going on being on the water. That was the reason they were able to get the players, and that's the reason we combined with them. Joe Nuxall. I knew Joe Nuxall. He's 15 years old, and he's pitching in a major league game. He's 15 years old. I love Nuxie. Nuxie was great, had great stories, just a grand old guy. When he was 15, Joe Nuxall did not dream of someday pitching in the big leagues. Nuxall was already pitching in the big leagues at 15. When Nuxall approached the mound to make his major league debut for the Cincinnati Reds against the St. Louis Cardinals on June 10th, he was exactly 15 years, 10 months, and 11 days old. And one of the people he's facing in that game is this guy. How many of you heard of Stan Musial? Stan the Man. Great baseball player, right? Great baseball player. And here's this 15-year-old kid. And he's going to pitch against Stan Musial. 2 weeks prior to that, I was pitching against 12 and 13 and 14-year-old kids in junior high school. And now all of a sudden I'm facing Stan Musial. I'm right out there, 60 feet, 6 inches away, trying to get someone out. Nuxall pitched 2/3 of the ninth inning. Musial was called to the Navy in June. Nuxall was going to hang around. Cincinnati was originally interested in his father, Orville. It was the Second World War. They were looking for whatever might be available. I just happened to be a big kid at 15 who could throw hard. They were looking for anyone who might have ability, and I happen to have a little at my age. After the season, he went back to high school, and he played high school football. The 1944 legacy, as we finish up, FDR did become president.
Outside, people.
FDR died on April 12, 1915. Truman became president. Truman knew nothing about the Manhattan Project. Absolutely nothing about it. Winston Churchill was kicked out as the English Prime Minister July 1945. Stalin would continue. He got the atomic bomb in 1949. Hitler apparently committed suicide on April 30th, 1945. Germany would fall to the Allies May 8th, 1945. United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan in August 1945. Japan surrendered to the United States on September 2nd, 1945. That is why you can't see buy war bonds today. Look at Bugs. He's imitating Al Jolson. Politically incorrect. Politically incorrect. At the end of World War II, January 3rd, 1946, the last proceeds from the Victory War Bond campaign deposited into the U.S. Treasury. 85 million Americans bought bonds. In those days, it was $185.7 billion worth of bonds. If you put that number, if you plug in the number today, $3 trillion worth of bonds was sold by 2024 dollars.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
The results, mass selling efforts to finance the war have never been matched. Any bonds today has been pulled out of circulation because of Bugs Bunny appearing in blackface imitating Al Jolson. Bugs Bunny, Nips the Nips, also pulled out of circulation because of slurs against the Japanese people. They were pulled out, that cartoon was pulled off TV in 1968. PBS did run any bonds today into the 21st century. Captain America character has been in other films and television series for decades. Oppenheimer, the movie, came out last year. You know the story, developed the atomic bomb. This is Werner von Braun. That is John Glenn, Wally Schirra, Mercury astronauts. With the war ending, the Americans, Soviets, and British scrambled to get their hands on the V-2 technology. Dr. Werner von Braun made the decision to surrender to the Americans. The Russians got their hands on the V-2 factory and test range. Operation Paperclip. Anybody ever hear of Operation Paperclip? No? Listen to this one. It was an opportunity for the United States to utilize the mind power of some of the brilliant minds that worked in Germany during World War II. More than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were taken from Germany to America. Guys like him. That is von Braun, surrounded by German soldiers, Nazis. The Cold War started in 1946. The Democratic Capitalist United States and the Communist Soviet Union pitted against one another. Each side sought to prove the superiority of the technology that it had, military firepower, and by extension, its political economic system. 15 years after World War II, von Braun worked with the U.S. Army in the development of ballistic missiles. Dick Hull would work with him. Dick Hull said he was a reformed Nazi. His brother, as I told you before, wasn't. He said the guys that he worked with, they didn't speak English to anybody. They spoke German to everybody, and he suspected they were still Nazis, but living in the United States. As part of a military operation called Project Paperclip, von Braun and an initial group of about 125 were sent to America, where they were installed at Fort Bliss, Texas. There they worked on rockets for the U.S. Army, assisted in V-2 launches at the White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. That is Irene Morgan getting a medal from Bill Clinton in 2001. Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP took up the Irene Morgan case, and in 1946, the Supreme Court ruling stated, "It seems clear to us that seating arrangements for different races in interstate motor travel require a single uniform rule to promote and protect national travel. Consequently, we hold the Virginia statute incontroversially invalid." In the South, they went like this to the Supreme Court. They decided not to go ahead with it. Irene Morgan, civil rights pioneer, received numerous awards, including the Presidential Citizens Medal, second highest civilian award in the country in 2001. She died August 10th, 2007. In 2004, the George Stinney case was reopened. The 2014 conviction against Stinney vacated. It was determined that the court had not given him a fair trial. This is Bob Block. That's Ruth Gruber's good friend, me, and Frank Carney, who's in the cable TV industry. On December 22nd, 1945, Harry Truman issued a directive that allowed the Oswego refugees to stay in the United States. Bob and Bill Goldstein produced a play called Haven about Ruth Gruber. She was a photojournalist and a lecturer. She died in 2016. She was 105 years old. She was still giving talks at 102. Anne Frank, the diary of Anne Frank was published by her father, Otto, in its original Dutch, an instant bestseller translated into 70 languages. You, as a student in Germany, must read it. The Franks family hideaway in Amsterdam opened as a museum in 1960. August 2022, the Keller Independent School District in Texas pulled Anne Frank's diary adaptation from school bookshelves. In April 2023, a Vero Beach, Florida school did the same thing after a group called the Moms for Liberty. Let's have liberty and ban books, right? Doesn't reconcile. But anyway, complained about the book. And there's my buddy Joe Nuxall, the 15-year-old. He returned to the major leagues with Cincinnati in 1952. Long career as a pitcher and a pinch hitter and then a broadcaster for the Cincinnati Reds. That's when I got to know him. And Dan Rooney's Pittsburgh Steelers franchise won 4 Super Bowls in the 1970s. The franchise is considered a model business. Any questions, any comments? Your turn to talk. Your turn.